The AP elbow should be performed with the patient seated at the end of the radiographic table, with the image receptor placed tabletop, with a 40-inch source-to-image distance and no tube angulation. We want to extend our collimation to about an inch on either side. We want about 2 to 2.5 inches into the humerus and down into the radius and the ulna. We want to place our marker, and here you will see the distal humerus, the elbow joint, and the proximal radius and ulna. The patient will hold very still, and then the exposure is taken. A diagnostic AP elbow radiograph must be free of motion and rotation. Demonstrated anatomy to include the radial head, neck, and tuberosity slightly superimposed over the proximal ulna, with proper visualization of soft tissue and bony detail. The medial oblique elbow should be performed with the patient seated at the end of the radiographic table, with the image receptor placed tabletop, with a 40-inch source-to-image distance and no tube angulation. Still centered at the elbow joint. Our collimation remains the same, and on this particular view, we will see the coronoid. A diagnostic medial oblique elbow radiograph must be free of motion and a 45-degree medial rotation. Demonstrated anatomy to include the coronoid process in profile and the radial head and neck superimposing the ulna, with proper visualization of soft tissue and bony detail. The lateral oblique elbow should be performed with the patient seated at the end of the radiographic table, with the image receptor placed tabletop, with a 40-inch source-to-image distance and no tube angulation. We're going to still center at the elbow joint. We're rolling away from the midline, so we're rolling to the lateral side. We're going to see the radial head and the radial neck, and we'll definitely see the distal humerus and the proximal radius and ulna, and the patient holds very still. A diagnostic lateral oblique elbow radiograph must be free of motion and have a 45-degree lateral rotation. Demonstrated anatomy to include the radial head and neck will be projected free of the ulna, with proper visualization of soft tissue and bony detail. Lateral elbow should be performed with the patient seated at the end of the radiographic table, with the image receptor placed tabletop, with a 40-inch source-to-image distance and no tube angulation. It's essential that her arm is down, touching the tabletop, so her arm or elbow is in truly a lateral position. So the olecranon is in profile here. We're still centering on top of the elbow joint. We're going to extend that collimation to about 2.5 inches into the radius and ulna, and the exposure is made. A diagnostic lateral elbow radiograph must be free of motion and rotation, with the elbow flexed 90 degrees. Demonstrated anatomy to include the superimposed humeral epicondyles, with proper visualization of soft tissue and bony detail.